So today's topic is shadow integration. This comes from Jungian analysis and the idea that we are all composed of the external persona and ego, but that underneath we have the shadow, or anima and animus. And so the purpose of shadow work or shadow integration is to bring these unconscious aspects of the anima or the animus, which are the feminine and masculine repressed parts of us, and also anything related to also the collective unconscious, things that humanity has repressed as well, and obviously other things throughout our life, from childhood, etc. Bringing those into the light, so bringing those into conscious awareness. I think sometimes we can consciously choose to participate in this process, or we're just kind of ushered along in our journey, and we are kind of forced to face our shadow in various ways, like a midlife crisis or divorce or some other tragedy that can happen that kind of disrupts the formed identity that we've created. So one way that I've found very helpful in terms of shadow integration is using my triggers to acknowledge and validate shadow parts of me. So, for example, if I am getting upset or angry at somebody else, or an external circumstance, I choose to examine what it is within me that is triggered. So maybe this person is like unresponsive to my messages or something like that. And so I ask within myself, like, what part of me needs to be seen and to be acknowledged, right, by this external source of validation, and in what ways can I give that to myself? Because that shadow part of us needs to be integrated and acknowledged within our own body, within our own system. Because maybe that's a part of us that didn't receive that when they were younger and didn't learn how to validate themselves. Carl Jung talks about complexes, which is, to me, it sounds kind of like exiles in internal family systems, or IFS, where you're kind of like shoving down these different parts of you And they can get even very distorted, I think, and develop these coping mechanisms or addictions to while they remain in the shadow. And I think they can come out in ways that you don't really want or that are unhealthy. And so when you integrate those exiles or those repressed parts, it releases their grip on you. And so you no longer have to hide anything. You no longer have to be scared of just showing up as your authentic self, which is very liberating and freeing, for one. And you start to actually notice when shadow parts show up in other people. And there's, this term called projection, which is very well known, but I think it's interesting to actually observe it in real time when people, they're trying to either inflate having a superiority complex, inflate their sense of self, or also they can feel very deflated or victimized or feeling inferior, right? And so there's some different things that you can notice when you've integrated more of yourself and your shadow parts, that people sometimes use these defense mechanisms. Their shadow comes out because they're uncomfortable being present with their full self, so they're not able to be fully present with their emotions. So they'll kind of go one way or the other, towards good or bad. But if you've integrated your shadow, you recognize that no emotions are bad. They are simply expressions of who we are, including anger and grief and sadness. It's like these are just emotions that are signals to us from our body, and we can express them in an integrated way. Once you've reached a certain level of consciousness, you start to recognize that we are all mirrors of each other, meaning, if we're all one, including with all the plants and animals and organisms in the cosmos, then different situations that present themselves can actually teach us more about ourselves, because we are also those things, in that we are, conscious, and we are interdependent and interconnected with all. And so that actually reduces a lot of conflict if you're not resistant to the idea of learning, even from very difficult circumstances. And that can actually catalyze your own healing process. So if we move about the world with conscious presence, that we become like an instrument of healing or awakening for both ourselves and others, because like when the ego is considered a problem, that's only when we're caught up in our thoughts, emotions, behaviors. But if we're aware of those things that we were previously identified with, then we can actually learn from situations and not condemn external factors for impeding our progress. And so when we're a conscious presence and witnessing others in their suffering, we can actually, in a way, not teach, but just embody that presence so that people kind of have a role model or example of what that looks like, so that they could potentially do that for themselves and for other people. And I really like this quote by Joseph Campbell. It's also, I think, attributed to Carl Jung, so one or the other. But the quote is essentially, it is the privilege of a lifetime to be one's self. And I think in order to really be yourself, you have to bring the shadow online. You have to be able to accept the parts of you that you have consciously or unconsciously repressed, or other, factors have caused these parts of you to be repressed. And bringing these parts online is what makes you whole. So when Carl Jung studied some of his patients who were struggling with psychosis, he noticed that a lot of the experiences that they were having were similar to the patients he was working with through what he calls the active imagination exercises, but integrating the unconscious memories, parts of themselves through dream analysis, things like that, or just in the daytime, having active imagination. He noticed the main difference was just that the patients who were psychotic just didn't have the ability or the foundation to really integrate these experiences into their life, and didn't really have a stable ego or sense of self. And so I think ego has also been misconstrued as like this bad thing, but we all have an ego, or sort of the center through which we experience the world. It's just not letting that self-identity or individuality run our life, and be able to identify with a larger reality, but still have that center through which to make choices and decisions and preferences and things like that. So I thought that was interesting, that a lot of the times those unconscious parts of ourselves, they're bubbling up, they want to be known, and it's really about creating that atmosphere of being able to accept, or that structure to integrate those experiences. And I think that does come with awareness and higher states of consciousness that can hold all of that. And I think that also depends on kind of the physical development of the body, the development of being aware of your kind of like the five skandhas, the forms, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and then consciousness. So you need to sort of build on that foundation. But that also reminds me of another Joseph Campbell quote, which is, the schizophrenic drowns in the same waters that the mystic swims in with delight. So I think it also calls into question some of the ways that we pathologize psychoses and altered states of consciousness, out of fear that they would somehow that, like, as a society we don't recognize or understand or validate our collective unconscious, right? Or just this experience of quote unquote not normal. And so these sort of, I would call colonization, a collective ego, has sort of repressed a lot of the collective unconscious, or shadow parts, including genocide and harm to indigenous peoples and cultures and animals and plants and beings. And so this sort of silencing of this collective historical trauma is extremely detrimental. And it doesn't, just because you try to silence something doesn't mean it goes away. And I think that's why you're seeing, there's so much political unrest, there's so much anger, right, at like authoritarian regimes, and then there's so much suppression, censorship, etc., of these parts of humanity that have been exiled. And so whatever you see, happening on an individual level, like in your own body, in some ways you can also extrapolate that to what you see externally, because we're all interconnected. These forces are not personal. And so shadow integration is actually a powerful transformational tool on both the individual and collective level. And the more conscious you are of it, the more empowered you will be to become who you truly are and who you are meant to be, and not be dictated by the kind of repressive dynamics of society, culture, your family even. So I think that shadow integration has been an extremely liberating framework through which to understand my own integration process, and also not ignoring these parts of me that needed to come to light.